If you're side hustling your ceramics, are you anxiously awaiting the day that you can quit the day job and be a real potter? And please, hear in my voice, real was clearly just said with giant air quotes and dripping in sarcasm. I'm going to repeat that again in case you were only half listening and now you're thinking, what the heck, Rebecca? I thought you understood this life that we lead. I said real in air quotes with sarcasm. It does not matter whether you're full-time or part-time or side hustling or once a month thing or whatever other ing that this phase of life might find you in. How you decide to pay for your healthcare does not mean that what you make is more or less worthy. And wow, I have just realized that apparently this is a very spicy intro because I've already brought up healthcare. But I know today's guest will appreciate the real talk spiciness because that is exactly what Nicole Bernard of NB Makes and I got into as we chatted about her progression from the perhaps typical side hustler dreaming of the day that she might quit a day job to being someone who actually embraces life in both realms. Not only embraces it, but dare I say, enjoys it. Nicole is balancing a long list of worlds that she moves between, from a communications career to growing her company NB Makes to sitting on boards that make major decisions about funding and somehow also finding the time to commit to a running group. Nicole is taking what she learns from every space and applying it to the other, from business to art and art to business. And I think that this holistic approach just might be the breath of fresh air so many of us multi-passionate people have been looking for. And we'll dig right into all of it right after a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online source for research and inspiration, featuring photos of objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great source for students and teachers. To find out more, visit www.rosenfieldcollection.com. This episode is also sponsored by the Archie Bray Clay Business, home of Bray Patch, a ceramic patching material that is best used for filling cracks and bonding breaks. Bray Patch can be applied to either green or bisqueware and fired up to cone 10. It fires paper white but can be tinted using your chosen clay body and be covered by opaque glaze or slip. Order anytime online at archiebrayclay.com. Now, on with the show. Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the show where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, seasoned entrepreneur of 14 years, Rebecca Ikes Cara. Hey, Nicole.
Hello.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I feel like we both just, every time I say that when it's someone I talk to on the regular, all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, now we're doing this thing.
I'm like, should I be very formal now? How should I introduce myself?
Well, I am going to make you introduce yourself,
Okay.
so why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Sure. Okay. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Bernard. I am founder and chief maker at NB Makes, which is a colored clay and art lifestyle practice based in Dallas, Texas. And I'm also a professional storyteller and communicator.
I love the description that you just gave. I was like, wait, I'm just going to even back up to the way you describe what NB Makes is. I know we've got like so much else to talk about, but how did you come up with that tagline?
Yeah. So actually, my tagline for my practice is "A good life is worth making," which I think ties really closely to what we're going to talk about today in terms of making your life better through the things that you make and also by having handmade things in your life. But I think about myself as the chief maker, hopefully, because eventually there'll be more than just me in this practice. So even though it's kind of weird to say that as it's just one person right now, I'm owning it because eventually I will need to own it. So I'm kind of using that as a manifesting thing. And then also too, my main thing is colored clay. I think that's how I center most of my things. So I make jewelry. I also make mugs with colored slips as well and other tableware. But I'm also starting to think about expanding my practice into art pieces that are larger, sculptural, and it's still going to be around colored clay. And so I think about the process of making those things, dyeing my clays, and what that does from a mental perspective to me, and then how also I'm able to bring that out into the world. So I don't say necessarily that I'm just like a potter, although there's no problem with that, but I do think about it truly as a practice, kind of like you would practice yoga or something else, because I'm thinking about the process of creating my tapestries and the process of creating each piece more than I'm really thinking about the outcome, although I really love the outcome of what I'm making too.
Well, and I love that it's such a distinct description. I mean, how many of us out there have small batch handmade, wheel thrown, small batch handmade? I mean, slab, I don't see slab built that often, but we kind of look around to the rest of the world when we're at a loss for words to say, well, how do I describe this? What do I do? And then we kind of see, okay, so-and-so over here is saying this, so-and-so over here is saying that. This little bit applies to me, this little bit, and let me just put them together. But that doesn't, when you describe something, and it does go to your obvious profession, and we're going to talk more about that, like it is a skill set to have unique words, to be able to, it takes time is what I'm trying to get to come up with that words which also connects back to practice, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really funny, actually. At times in my art career, I've had what I'll call creative envy. So, for example, I would walk into a museum and almost like have a panic attack because I could see how something like this could be made, how somebody could paint this, but I can't do that. And so when I say practice, I'm talking about the practice of decoupling my thoughts about creating the art into like these manageable pieces of creating the art in a way that's comfortable and peaceful to me, in a way that doesn't require me to think 5 steps ahead. Like right now, I'm making all of these little bitty tiles for an unknown type of piece that I hope to make in the future. But it's because those little tiles are very similar to the jewelry that I make, just without the holes. But there's comfort in that. And I know, okay, if I make 10,000 of these, eventually I'll have a lot of them. And then I'll do something with them, right? But I love the process.
You'll have to.
I will have to, or I'll have to like move into a different place, right? But let's start there, and let's start with the fact that I love to make them. And when I see them, I'm just like filled with wonder every time I make one of these. So what happens if I just make more and more and more of them and then figure that other piece out later?
Okay, this is fascinating because how in the world, how did you come to this approach is where I'm going with this question, because so many of us get so attached to wanting an end product so quickly, right? Myself included. I'm saying so many of us because it's me. Let's just spoiler.
I would probably say I came to this backwards. Over the past couple of years, I've really done a lot of self-work on my values. So I did an exercise, actually really great. I recommend this to everybody. If you haven't done a values exercise, go get this box of cards that you can get off of Amazon. It has like 300 words or something like that in it. And you just go through it and pick the words that resonate with you the most. And from that, I realized that my 3 values are wonder, community, and mastery. And the things that I love the most in my life hit all 3 of those, including pottery. But in terms of the really wanting to perfect something, that's that piece. So when I started throwing on the wheel, I didn't make a single thing, I don't even know, for probably like 4 months or anything like that. I was probably the slowest wheel thrower in my class because I would take that first step and stop after I had just like centered it and then take it off the wheel. And then once I learned how to center, I would open and then take it off the wheel. And I would just learn how to do that until I could feel it, until I'm just addicted to flow state. So until I reach flow state with something, I don't want to do it. So I just am really always focused on how do I get something that I'm doing to feel good, not just look good, not just intellectually be good, but hit all of those parts. So that way I can feel satisfied with it. And it's taken me a long time to realize that. But now that I have, I can also be a lot more patient with myself about what I'm producing, because I can realize, oh, that's just that tension of like, you don't know how to do this yet. Or, no, that's really ugly, but at least it felt good. So let's figure out how to make it better. So both of those things at the same time, you know?
That's hilarious. I also think this reminds me of the fact that we both have a background in music. As soon as you started saying you do this one thing and then you take it off the wheel and do the next thing and you take it off the wheel, I'm like, oh, right.
Yep.
This is going to be a public announcement episode for why everybody should put their children into music, basically.
Exactly. It's rehearsal. Or like you could probably insert theater
Scales.
or yes, whatever. It's all of those fundamentals that you learn how to appreciate, because once you understand that, then you can build upon that. And I, again, in the past couple of years, I've really just learned that patience element of the why and learning to appreciate it and not feel that tension of just rushing to the outcome. Because I definitely did growing up, and it's probably why I wasn't interested in continuing with music too much, because it was like too much tension for me to bear. But I think with pottery, I have so much more patience for it, because the ratio of what does feel good, even when it's bad, even when it's ugly, is so high in comparison to other things that you could do.
I just realized that I think learning a craft, music or the arts, are probably the only two spaces. And whenever I say any statement that has only or some grandiose thing, I'm like, oh, here I'm putting my foot in my mouth. Here we go. Somebody can correct me. But with technology anymore, there are so few things in our life that have incredibly delayed gratification, right? And so with that background, at least for me, I could like sit at the wheel and cut things in half and not be worried about it, because I had gone through that pain of delayed gratification with learning an instrument. And so it's interesting to think about that experience then applying to your second thing in, second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever, the next thing in life that you're doing, because you've kind of already gone through those pain points to understand like, oh, okay, I just got to get through here to get, we're 5 minutes in and this is where we're going to bring up running also. Like, I just got to get through mile 2 in order to actually enjoy this, quote unquote. I'm using air quotes. Nicole enjoys running. I just keep talking about the fact that I'm going to do it again. So, people can infer what they want with that.
Well, I'll also give a pro tip to you, and not pro because I'm not a pro, but a good tip that was given to me about running and that keeps me in the streets is that it's actually after mile 3. So everybody hurts until mile 3. And I said, even good runners? And they're like, yes, even professional runners. It's something scientific that I don't know. I'm a words person and I'm an arts person, but there's something scientific behind it. So again, I think that there's that mile 3 in a lot of different things that we do of what is that threshold of this. For me, honestly, it's probably learning that I needed to truly wheel wedge my porcelain. I am just coming to this realization this summer of like, I really, really need to wheel wedge my porcelain so I can get the results that I want. And yeah, it takes more time, but it ends up coming out with a better result, and I lose so much less.
Yeah. I want to back you up and have you define wheel wedge, because in my mind, I think I know what you're talking about, but we all know what happens when I make assumptions.
Yeah. When you center and then you cone up and cone down and cone up, and just making sure that you're waking up the porcelain, because I don't, right? I'll make 5 or 6 lumps, 10 lumps, 20 lumps, and then I'm impatient with it and want it to just be ready when I want it to be ready, but it's not ready. It's not ready. So I have to wake it up and say, hey, it's time to do this thing. You're going to be a mug now. So let's do it.
You're just like, and you're centered. Let me open this. Let me pull these walls right now.
Yep. No, I have to I have to be at peace with the clay and say, what do you want to do now? Let's get the show on the road, right? And we have to be one for that.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. Okay, so let's back up a little bit before we get, because we've already kind of dropped some hints in terms of you've got music going on, you've got professional storytelling, which I also want to define, we've got pottery, all the things. People who think I'm busy, I'm like, actually anymore, I'm kind of like removing things out of life. And then Nicole's over here creating new Instagram accounts and doing more.
Oh, man. So in other words, Rebecca's saying, I have too many hobbies, which I agree with. a hobby and a business and a career. So I don't know.
I think that you are just the personification of what most of us as millennials have done in our life and have been like, oh, wait, is this sustainable? But for you, you're still doing this, at least from the outside looking in a very healthy, balanced, like I did not do it sustainably. Whereas like you're managing something. I don't know. There's magic fairy dust going on somewhere. But before we get to all that, how did you first get into clay, or how did we even like kind of wind up, however detailed you want to go?
Yeah.
3,000-foot view.
Well, we could take a trip in the way, way back time machine, because sometimes folks ask me, I guess if you see my Instagram persona, they're like, so you're a full-time potter? And I tell them, no, actually I'm not. And a lot of people looked at me pretty shocked because I think I do the Reels thing and I've got a website and all that professional stuff that most people do. But
you're in shows at NCECA. You're making this list real short, I just want to say.
Yeah. Well, so that's the thing is like, I am doing all those things and I'm very proud of all of those things. I also didn't come into clay until about a decade ago, which I went to school like probably about 15 years before that. But what a lot of people don't know too is that I call myself a little bit of a struggling artist because I really wanted to be in fine arts. And I actually was accepted into a fine arts program in graphic design, really intended to go into that, wanted to do the whole New York thing and be a designer in New York City and all of that kind of stuff. And that's what I was working towards, got accepted into the program. And then my dad looked at me the summer before orientation and said, maybe you should think about going into advertising instead, which is much more on the business side of the house, right? We were afraid of that whole starving artist thing. And I think deep down in myself, I was also afraid of it. I saw I'd have to go to grad school. And not that I'm afraid of the work, but more of just, again, that rushing to where am I going to get to? Like, how do I get to stability? All of that kind of thing. So it was adjacent enough where I was like, yeah, that could kind of make sense. And there was a creative element to that program that I was working to get into. So that's what I ended up doing is I switched during orientation. I went that direction, worked my butt off to get into the creative advertising program and hated it. I was sensitive. I was so sensitive. So when it came to critique, I failed out my first semester and went back for another semester, passed through. But I was just like, I can't imagine spending my whole life fighting to do this, fighting to create these beautiful ideas that people work to ignore in advertising. And this is not a knock on anyone who does advertising because, again, brilliant people, brilliant concepts. It just wasn't something that I think I was ready to dedicate my life to. So, but communications was close to that. It was in the same school. And there was something that I thought was really interesting about it. It was focused in the problem-solving element. So instead of being the person who says, hey, this is the idea, there were also other people in that process that would say, hey, this is on the client side. This is what problem we're having that would facilitate the need for this idea. And just being honest, I'm probably a little bossy. And so I was like, you know what? I resonate with that too. I really like that. I was one of like very few people in a class that was dedicated to this that actually got the concept of that. And so I started working towards that direction, both media and also like more of the corporate communications track. So fast forward, I started a career in that and got placed as part of a rotation program that I was hired as my first job into corporate communications. And even if you can't tell now, I'm an introvert, very much so. I need to go hibernate after this. I won't speak to anybody for maybe 2 days if I can help it. But they told me as part of that program that I was going to be a spokesperson for the company. And I said, oh, yeah, absolutely not. That's not going to happen. And I did. I spent about 6 or 7 years being a spokesperson for a global technology company. Yeah. And so in the midst of all of this, right, like I was doing this, but art was just like over here. It was something that I would do. I was still very crafty. I would still paint a lot. I drew a lot. If you looked at my notebook, even at work, it was all full of sketches of things, but I just never had found my medium to really do something. Very truth be told, I got into a bad breakup and was like, I need something to do, so let me take this pottery class. And I fell in love with that instead. And I would spend I had a very demanding job, but I would spend until 6 or 7 whenever I got off of work until 2 to 3, sometimes in the morning in the studio, go to sleep, clean off the clay, go to work, come back to the studio as much as I could. I just was really obsessed with it. And then doing that thing that we just talked about of like centering the clay, taking it off the wheel, like making nothing, right? But just being so interested in the process of that. And so fast forward, I spent another probably 6 or 7 years doing that. And then the pandemic hit. And just at that time, I was starting to get into a flow of things that I was really interested in. I had found jewelry and I was excited about that. I had found colored clay and staining my clays because I really, really, really hate glazing. Hot take. I know there are some people who are amazing at it. I'm a control freak, like I said. So I needed to know what my colors were going to be. And so when I knew that I could put the color in the body of the clay, I literally tested every color that Mason made and had all these test tiles and was just like about to really nerd out on that. And then the pandemic hit and I had no studio access whatsoever. So I was making these little pieces in my apartment. And I had a friend who actually lives in the neighborhood I live now, which is not too far from where I was, who was willing to fire for me. And I was so grateful. But that's how I had produced like a lot of stock of just these things that I would call worry beads, because quite frankly, I think we were all worrying, but they were these small little things. And I would sit on conference calls sometimes and make these. And just like I had so many of them that I felt like it was coming to a tipping point of needing to do something with them. So I started making the jewelry and I started photographing them. I had actually just kind of like done a little photo shoot with some friends on a girl trip in March of 2020. So I had those pictures and I started creating a website and all of this stuff. And it was just like this inertia that was just like, let me start a business. And, it's funny, that same fear, I had some really interesting conversations with my parents because we haven't done this. We're not entrepreneurs in my family, right? We don't have
Agreed.
Exactly. Like if you don't have that history and that support, there's a lot of fear there. And so when I had started this, it was like a concern and like, about, you've got to protect yourself. There's all these legal things. Are you checking into all of this? And like the truth answer is probably not well enough. But the other true answer is probably better than some other people too.
Yes.
So
yes. Amen. Exactly.
I know, right? Like I bothered to call the SBA. So
that's impressive.
Right? I had a little mentor coach thing.
On the one hand over here, there's these systems that are beautiful and dialed in and like a thing of beauty. And then on the other hand, there's this other category that's like, well, it's worked so far.
Exactly. And I say, for the record, I have an actual tax license. I have a DBA. I have things that make this a legal business. And then I also got an LLC, and I rushed to do that because I felt like I needed to be legit, right? It was that imposter syndrome thing seeking in. But more than anything, I did it. I put it out in the world. And a lot of this at the beginning was family, friend support, but sold out the collection. And I was like, I think there's a place in the world for this thing, right? And so I started doing some markets. Same thing. People were like, wow, I've never seen anything like what you're making. And a lot of it was the jewelry again, because it was what I had the most access to, but same kind of practice applied. And I think I really spent a lot of time dialing that in to that point where it felt good, where it looked good. And it just all kind of was coming together. And so that was a little more than 3 years ago. This is my fourth year being a maker. And I do it at the same time as having a full-time communications career. I will say now I'm in a completely different place with my communications career than I was when I created it. I was doing it as an escape because I was very overwhelmed. I was not aligned with my values of what I was doing, what I was communicating about. Now I'm in a place where the organization that I work for, I love the team that I work for. And so it's actually raised some really interesting questions in my mind. Whereas at one point I would probably have said to myself, oh, the dream is 100% to be a maker, be a potter, be that is what I want to do 100% of the time. And I'm not sure if I do want to, because I feel like I learn a lot from the business world and I get a lot from the things that you learn in corporate America, for good or bad. That
learning is on both sides.
correct. Correct.
Yes.
But I learned so much that I feel like, one, it's possible, and two, it's so valuable that I would have a hard time living in just one world. But I feel like
Do
I
you
have
feel
to
like-
choose sometimes. Yeah.
There's two things at play here. I think number one, I think it's more common than most. I was just talking to someone the other day, and I was saying how, like, artists who have other jobs still in the arts, like if they're adjunct at a school or teaching at a studio. It was Isaac Scott and I were talking about this. And I was like, the perception in the arts world is like that is a quote unquote acceptable other job, right? Because you're still in the industry, if you will. But there are some people I have spoken to who are teaching. Some people love teaching and have a passion for it, and that's fantastic. Other people fell into it because it was the perceived secure route and they can create more freely, knowing they're getting this salary every 2 weeks and whatnot. And in that situation, I'm like, how is that any different than what you're doing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. If I had thought better of this, I would have gotten the name of this book. But at one point, I found a book about this, of like what artists actually did with their day. And I'll have to send it to you. Maybe we could share it afterward. But
Yes,
there's
I want to read it. So just send it to me no matter what.
Yeah, and then there are two of them, actually. There's one that is, and it's all different kinds of artists and maybe even some scientists and others. About half of them had day jobs and the other half didn't. And like some would take a long walk in the morning. They would sit down to write from 2 to 10 and in a specific spot. And then they would go. Some of them had to have a drink every night, whatever it was. But I found it so educational because for me, it broke down that whole misconception that you have to do it a certain way, that you have to only be focused on this, that you have to work a million hours. Also, some of the most prolific artists and thinkers of our time kind of had things on back burner all the time, right? And then we're just able to create in the way that they do. So when you ask the question at the beginning about practice, right? If you're a yoga master, you're practicing 7-8 hours a day, but maybe you're also not. Maybe you're only practicing a certain window, but when you do, it has a very specific purpose in your life. And so I think about my clay practice the same. Like I would be embarrassed at this very moment to tell you how often I'm in the studio, but when I go to the studio, I have a plan. I spend a lot of time sketching. I spend a lot of time organizing. And I think that is one of the things that I've learned a lot from the business world is time management. And not just time management, but managing multiple projects at once. And the ability to say, this could be very well on track and in progress, but I'm, only doing this per week. I might just be coloring the colorways for this particular project this week, but it's on track. And so I could show you some very sociopathic looking time management blocks. And I honestly, when I do, I plan my personal life, my clay life, my business life, all on the same tracker, and also my milestones at the same time. So that way I can know that I'm in balance in any particular week. Because sometimes I got to shift this over to that week because I could only do so much. And running is on that too, by the way.
I'm embarrassed to say, given I'm so systems oriented, as everyone has heard a million times, I am embarrassed to say how long it took me to realize I needed to put everything in the same place, right? Because I was compartmentalizing. I had the kind of project management system for clients and for work, and that lived over here. And then like my personal stuff would just be in multiple apps, like in my notes in my phone or in the like built-in reminders on your phone or whatever. And what happened with that is, to your point, in terms of like even any given week being in or out of balance, it was like, well, I was going to plan my time. I was going to first look at the client work and I was going to fill the day. And then it was like my personal life was getting what was left over.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And
right? And that's not where we want to be.
how can you create?
That's not healthy.
Yeah. How can you create from an empty cup? How can you do that?
Or just show up for your friends.
Mhm.
I don't know how many times I was late for drinks with my best friend just because it was like, oh, sorry, I had to finish this, or traffic was bad. And it was like, well, yeah, you live in Chicago. You knew traffic was going to be bad. Like, you could have accounted for that to respect the person you were showing up for on time.
Exactly. Yep. Respect them, respect yourself, and realize the boundaries, right? There's intentional choices all the time.
Let's start with a pragmatic question, because I do have a couple of questions from our podcast supporters, which people have heard me talk about our community members before. And I'm intentionally changing that lingo. Number one, because communications professional, the pressure is on. But number two, because I'll explain this at the end of the episode. You don't have to listen. We've got a different option for people who are just interested in submitting questions to the podcast now without the whole community thing. I'll explain that later. The point is, Jenna was wondering how you got your focus, how you got into jewelry and mugs as your main focus in clay design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question.
I should also tell you before that, she said you're the sweetest, kindest human.
Well, and I love my egg mug that I got from Jenna. So there we go. It's a mutual love fest here. So I think it comes just from an interest in what you love, right? And actually the jewelry was a bit more personal. I can take a little bit of a step back on this for a few reasons. So right around the same time that I was starting my business, I was doing a couple things. One, I was going natural with my hair, which was kind of an identity thing, right? If you can't tell on this podcast, I'm Black. And I, for years, had been straightening my hair. It was a corporate America thing, right? Feeling like I had to fit into a certain box, look a certain way. And then I realized, okay, what's healthy for myself? So I spent a lot of time in what we call in the Black transitioning community for your hair, bun life, where your hair is just pulled back in a bun while you wait it to grow back from all the years that you damaged it. So I was wearing a lot of really funky earrings so people knew that I was a girl. And so that's how I got really interested in creating jewelry, because I was in bun life for so long and I needed to look cute. But at the same time, I mentioned that photo shoot that I had done at the beginning of the pandemic. So I had a group of girlfriends, and March of 2020, we went to DC, and we're from all around the country. Some of us from Dallas, one friend that lives in DC, and we were like, hey, let's go to the National African American Museum. Hadn't been, was very excited to go. And
stunning. Everybody should go.
Amazing.
Only museum I've ever been in that's made me emotional.
Very emotional. So if you haven't been into it, what the experience that you have is you come onto this platform and you go in an elevator that literally takes you down, down, down into what feels like the hull of a slave ship. And the curators have done an amazing job in creating this experience where you're in darkness, where you see the timeline backing up into when the slave trade started. And then when you get out, the exhibit is claustrophobic and just completely dark. And you're looking at all of these artifacts. And I had jewelry on the mind because I was trying to figure out the logistics of, okay, are we going to the National Mall to take these pictures, or what are we doing? And I walked out and I saw these beads in a glass case. And I was like, what are beads doing in here? There's so many other really moving things. You see the diagrams of all of the people laying in the slave ships. You see the paths. But then it was like beads right there. And I was, what is that? And so I read, and it was the first time I was introduced to the concept of trade beads. And trade beads, if you didn't know, because I didn't know, they were used to barter for a variety of different things around the time of the slave trade. Oftentimes they were glass, but they have that same kind of look that my jewelry does in a lot of ways, of these bright blues and greens and just really vibrant colors. And they were also used to trade people. And so I felt myself getting really emotional and anxious because I just didn't know how to reconcile that in myself. And at the same time, I also didn't really have a lot of language because I have been somebody who was kind of running from the concept of a lot of race conversations. I just grew up in a predominantly white area, and there was never anything good that came from it. So I was like, let's just kind of stay out of this arena here. But I felt this tension and this anger and confusion of how could this happen? How could my people, my ancestors, in a lot of ways, people I don't know because of the situation, be traded for something I'm making now for fun. And so, again, the introvert in me, the little quiet introvert, I never sit down in a photo booth and like record that feeling. But I was so overcome by it that the museum has these checkpoints throughout where you can stop and record something for the National Archives. So I did. And I said, hey, I'm an artist from Dallas. This is my first time in the museum. I am just really emotional about the trade bead. I'm somebody who's making beads for fun, and this is part of my ancestry, and I don't know how to reconcile this. Now, fast forward, unfortunately, a couple more months, and then we have the killings of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and all of these people whose lives were cut too short. And so race actually has been something that I have really leaned into and spent a lot of time thinking about, reflecting on. I found the language during that time to have conversations about it. And so it's been something that has been kind of quiet up until this year, quiet part of my practice of just thinking about the connection of those things. And then I actually had the opportunity to teach a workshop on clay jewelry making that was called Beads for Hope. And I was able to bring those things together and tell people about that journey and that story and that experience for myself. And I wrote an article in Studio Potter about this as well. And so I think that it's one of those interesting things that like every part of your story matters. Everything that you're doing matters. Every thought that you're having, every feeling that you're having matters. And people wonder why people are drawn to certain personas, or you could, whatever you want to call it, why people spend too much time on Instagram and TikTok. Why? These are all stories that we're telling. Even the people that you hate, you kind of like the way that they say those words funny. We're just attracted to that kind of thing. And so I think it's really interesting because it's like, don't take your own story for granted. Those things matter. The experiences that you've had and having enough time to even reflect upon your own story matters. So you can bring those things together and make it part of what you're doing. So that was a really long way to say why I make jewelry, but that's it, right? Like it's taken me that long to figure it out of not why I just started it, but why I've continued doing it. And then strangely enough, my mug and tableware practice has just kind of like evolved because of that. And it's more of a reflection of whatever else I'm trying to work out. So whether it's like different types of surface design or whatever, people like mugs. So I like doing things for people, but I'm more interested in, again, that like process and the practice and how do I apply this to that element.
That's really interesting. I mean, I'm going to go with first the simple and then go backwards. I would have guessed mugs started before jewelry because it's just like what everybody starts with, right? So that's fascinating to me that that's actually after the jewelry. Mm-hmm. And I want to talk more about that. But I am so glad Jen asked that question because wow, just wow. I mean, it also reminds me a little bit of how frequently we as artists, I'm not going to say we, me, how frequently I struggle when we think about all of the things that are happening in the world and where is our place in that? What are we doing to help? What are we doing to bring about any change? What are we doing, period, when we're kind of in this aesthetic bucket, right? And it reminds me of thinking about how many times have we been in various museums or just learning about history, and that on the positive side, decoration was always there, right? Like adornment was always there. Humans, for whatever reason, have always found creating and art and storytelling to be important. I mean, storytelling for obvious reasons, but the act of creating. And then obviously on the less positive side of the power of those objects that we now think about as being, what's the word? Not superfluous, but like non-essential, right? Like earrings maybe are not a essential thing when you're trying to decide between eggs and earrings.
Exactly.
But the story that you can tell because of that object now is absolutely an essential story. Mm. That's the power of art. You've just reminded me, like, in so many different levels of, like, our space in this crazy, crazy hot mess that we're all working through.
Absolutely. Well, and even that, the concept of trade beads to me was really eye opening as well, because it was taking what certain groups of people thought were beauty and essential. And because beauty to them was essential, it was something to be worshiped, right? In a godlike way, because it was part of their spiritual practice where they're like, oh my gosh, we've never seen this beautiful thing. In a lot of ways, I think that that's why I appreciate art. And so I feel almost an ancestral connection to that as well, because I'm like, sometimes I'm so overcome with the beauty of certain things, artistic or otherwise, and nobody else cares. And I'm like, what's wrong with me? And I'm like, well, I think that there's a little bit of comfort and peace in the fact that, well, I think my ancestors also felt that way about some other things. And so that was healing. But then there's also the opposite side of that where it's like, and art can be used for bad things, right? And so it's just like technology. I think we end up in this conversation a lot now more today about technology than art. But, you know, technology is not neutral. Some people think that it is just a neutral tool. It is not. And art is not, in my opinion, either. So we have to be cognizant of how we're wielding these tools because people can be hurt by them. Hopefully not my jewelry. I think that was what my mom was afraid of, that somebody would choke
There's some sharp ones.
Some child would choke on an earring back. And so I do have a disclaimer on that, and I am legally protected, I hope. But, you know, that's a different thing.
Wait. Back up. I love parents. I love all of our parents.
Yes.
The concern was that a child would choke on an earring back.
Now, any number of things. People could sue you for any number of things. And so it's like, and that's
true.
Real.
I just want to know, this just reminds me of how, like, we as small businesses are, so many of us at least, are of the perfectionist tendency of like, oh, I have to get all of this perfectly and right. And I just need to go on record for people to know that I have photographed events for Fortune 500 companies who didn't have contracts in place to hire me. And I was the one that gave them a contract. So, like, we're doing fine, y'all.
I'm going to ask for us to dive into that a little bit more. And not specifically those, like, you don't have to give the tea about those companies. But I understand that completely because, again, these institutions that you think really have it all buttoned up, when you're inside one, when you work inside them every day, you realize that these organizations of any kind are just a collection of people who are figuring it out. I remember when I went to work for, again, that first job where I was like, oh, you're going to be a spokesperson for a Fortune 200 company, right? Like that's crazy time. And it ended up happening. But people looked to me for answers. And I was just like, oh no, this is
Right.
an issue.
Like, I just graduate. Like, I got hired last week, y'all.
I'm still asking. And, you know, over time we become worthy of answering those questions. But I remember the first time somebody seriously asked me a question and I was like, oh, we're all just out here figuring it out, aren't we? And it has always been true. And I think that is a comforting thing. And, you know, kind of going back to the concept of imposter syndrome, it's helped a lot actually working in more established places, because I think if I had never done that, if I didn't do it every day, I would feel like a lot more people have it figured out. Now, to the credit of, like, you know, I think my current role and where I'm working now and all of those kinds of good things, the point is to figure it out. That's why you go to work, is to figure it out and to solve problems. And I think when I was able to switch my mind to that point of, we don't go to work to just like execute, we go to work to figure it out, a lot of possibilities open up in a lot of different things. So when I don't know how to do this in my ceramics business, or when I'm concerned about contacting a retailer or whatever, I'm like, you know what? Chances are they're trying to figure it out too. They're trying to find vendors, just like I'm trying to find markets. And we need to meet in the middle. And it's shown me that there's so many yeses out there that we think are never possible. And it's like, but have you asked? Have you asked? If you asked, maybe you would find that they have a need that's different than what your need is. And in the middle, you both get what you need.
Ooh, I love this because it's taking away the risk aversion for me. Right? Because a lot of people talk about like, jump and you'll figure it out. And it's like, On some things, yes, but on perhaps quitting a job and starting a business, depending on your dependents in your life or mortgage, rent, all of these other realities, like maybe let's jump with a parachute, shall we? Like let's figure this out first. But what you're describing to me is the same situation, but not a jump. And instead, the person or the opportunity you're trying to get to is actually on the same side of the canyon, if you will. And you're both kind of looking over there going, how do we do this? And, oh, we could do this together.
I love the description of that. And I think it depends on how much you're capable of the transitive property, right? Because I like to just make these really obscure connections that I have to explain to people in my mind of how I got there. But it's just like, oh, I could tweak this and learn this over on the wheel, that I'm suddenly like applying this concept in my day job, and vice versa, right? And so I always feel like I'm learning. I always feel like I'm learning how to attack problems differently. And I think the tension in my life has come when I try to compartmentalize too hard. Instead, I realize I am one person, and the running and the singing and the ceramics business and communications, they're all elements of what I do. These are my strengths. So how do I figure out how to apply them to each other instead of having to feel like I have to label and stay in these little boxes? And it was actually really important to me when I transitioned into the new role that I'm in now and the new company, that I was pretty honest about it from the beginning of like, this is how I spend my weekends and my nights. I do these things and it's part of what I do. And I talk to people about it, because if I felt like I had to hide, I wouldn't be honest with myself.
I think that my assumption, rather, is that makes a huge difference in that comfort level of being able to say, I enjoy my 9 to 5, and I also own a business and am a potter, regardless of if it's full time or not, because the 9 to 5 also knows, that like you are your whole self everywhere you're showing up, as opposed to my assumption for people who are kind of in that tension between working Monday through Friday, wishing they could just start their own thing and do their own thing. I'm wondering if it is true or not for people that tension is lying in the fact that it's kind of this secret thing.
Yeah, I do. And I've experienced it both ways. And I think for me, being able to be honest about it is great. And I think there's a lot of self-permission that has to happen, right? Like you could have permission from your job to flex your hours or do whatever. But if you're not letting yourself figure that out and also coming up with systems for yourself that makes it work. I used to get really, really upset when I would, for example, like let's say I was out for a run and I'd have a really good 9 to 5 job idea or a good pottery idea. I would be upset if that idea didn't come in the time that I had allotted to think about that thing, which makes no sense, right? That's just not how life and minds and bodies and time works. But it was because I was misaligned and I didn't have the right systems in place to be able to parking lot those things and say, yeah, here, I'm going to put this over here. And I know, and I trust myself enough to know that when it's time for me to create, I have a list of things that I have been doing here that I could just pull off the shelf and I can decide. And it's fun, but it's taken a long time to figure that out.
Pragmatically, I want to ask you how you capture those ideas in those moments, because I've got a couple of other pragmatic questions I want to get to too, because philosophically it sounds beautiful, but it can either become chaos or it can become like one source of inspiration for another source of inspiration. And I've got a feeling, for you at least, part of this comes down to how you're organizing all of this.
Well, I was going to say chaotic notes app folders, truly. And I have a running note that I start every week. I do a lot of weekly planning that is, called like, what am I doing this week? And I basically, for all 4 vectors of my life, like the major things that I'm doing in there. And so as I start thinking 2 weeks ahead, I just drop it in that week and say, future Nicole can deal with that then. I don't need to do that right now. Or this is a Thursday studio thing. I'm on Monday right now. So I don't have to be trying to solve for Thursday on Monday. And it's that constant practice of giving yourself grace and trusting yourself. And it's sometimes falling, right? And realizing where it's not working, but then more times than not realizing where it is working and saying, okay, I don't need to worry about that before I get there because I've done this every week. And so this is how we do life. This is just how we do life and how we balance life.
But this actually speaks to why I love systems so much and why I try and force feed them to everyone else. Because for me, you're getting it out of your head and you're putting it somewhere.
Yes.
Right? And to me, that's like a weight. If your head is full of marbles that are constantly rolling around and knocking into each other, and one is coming to the forefront and you're like, ooh, that one's beautiful. Let me grab that one. But then actually, I can't hold on to this one right now because I'm in the middle of this other thing. Number one, I can't fall asleep.
Yeah.
Number two, I'm not actually going to remember how beautiful that idea was potentially. And so if I have places to put these things, I can come back to them when I have time. And maybe by the time I come back to them, it's like, actually, that wasn't that great of an idea. Or when I come back to them and it still is a good idea, then it's like, oh yeah, now I actually want to commit time to bringing this into the world kind of thing.
Yeah. Can I tell you what made this really, there were two ahas that have solidified this system for me. One was when I was in an original band. Again, too many hobbies. But somewhere...
Tell me there's an album somewhere on the internet. Tell me there's embarrassing pictures. Nobody could see your facial expression when you said this. And I was like, I'm picturing high school. I'm picturing a garage. I'm picturing a zigzag part. I need to know the details.
There was definitely a chuggy side part, but I was solidly 26. So this was just not too long ago. But very strangely, I got pulled into a original band with a couple of coworkers. We were playing garage band, and then we all of a sudden decided to make it a real thing. And had the pandemic not hit, I probably would have been more in a band than I would have been a professional potter, which is wild, right?
Fascinating. And I also just want to point out, in case anybody was half listening, when you said garage band, I'm pretty sure you're talking about the video
100%.
game. And I love that it was like, we're playing a video game. This isn't that hard. Let's start a band.
Exactly. Well, so when we started writing music, because at first we were a cover band that just signed up for 2 hours at a bar and somehow filled that set list. We then started writing our own music. And I gotta say, had these dudes not moved away, it's some good stuff. You can go drop 10 cents on us, by listening to our stuff on Spotify if you'd so desire.
100% gonna do that after this. Oh my God.
So we started writing, and I was the songwriter, I was the lyricist for this endeavor. And I couldn't remember. So that's how I started this whole system, was getting these little clips of something that felt like a song and just dropping it into a note and then coming back together. And we had a very organic way of writing together. They were brilliant. Still, these folks are brilliant at music theory and would just jam for hours on these amazing riffs that I've never heard still to this day. They make beautiful music. And then I would come in on top of that with some nugget that I had been simmering in my notes app for 2 months. Or I was really good at capturing what they were doing, because they could just make up these riffs all the time, but nobody would ever record them, right? And so just to take it back to pottery so it doesn't get too far, this is the same as your sketchbook, right? This is the same as those ideas that you have. You've got to capture that stuff, because that stuff is magic and gold. And when you feel like you're stuck, you could come back to that stuff at any point. So that's really important. The other piece that has really solidified this for me was during the pandemic, I found out that I don't have an inner monologue and I don't speak to myself in my brain. And it's actually been really, really freeing for me as a communications person who deals with words all the time, because I don't constantly talk to myself in English. Most of my thoughts are pictures. So I always kind of struggle to figure out, well, why do some people just have the gift of gab? And for me, I'm basically translating what I'm seeing into English for you. And so when I do come up with those words, I need to capture them somehow because I'm not going to remember them exactly how I just had to say it for you or how I'm thinking it. So I constantly take all these notes because it's hard for me. It's actually hard for me to come up with words, even though, again, I do this professionally. So this system has helped me figure that out over time.
I wanted to just reiterate one thing you said in the middle there in terms of it being the sketchbook or the list of ideas and words, pictures, whatever it is, because also for me, whether it's pragmatically in terms of like, what do I need to do today when I wake up and not kind of having that, I don't have another word for it, but like waste of time of like sorting through the stuff. Whether it's pragmatic like that or whether it is in like a creative period of like, no, all of us, I'm sure at some point has walked into the studio, sat down at the hand building table or the wheel or wherever it is and been like, so,
what are we doing today?
what are we going to do? Right. And for most people, even whether they're full-time or part-time or hobbyist or side hustling, whatever, your time is not endless no matter what. I mean, especially if you're fitting it in around other work, around caretaking and parenting and all of these other things, then it's even more crucial. But to be able to just sit down and start making, even if it's not like your end goal piece, but just to start, I think like momentum is a very underrated silver bullet, if you will, right? Everybody's out there on Instagram getting all of the ads from all of the people of like, if you're not doing this, you're missing out. If you're not doing that, all of the things, when really the secret to it all is like just getting started.
Mm-hmm.
Just go and then keep going and then keep showing up and ta-da.
Yes, consistency and more simmering, right? More of the parking lotting these little ideas. And you can do, I think the more work that you do and just kind of sorting those things out before you start in some cases, not to the point of analysis paralysis, but just being like, this one is good, this one is not so good. You waste less time when you're actually doing, which again, for some folks is probably more helpful than others. Other people learn through doing. I tend to be somebody who will get discouraged by doing poorly. So if that's you, I think that's a process like this could help. Pinterest is something I use a lot too, because I could just be like passively wasting time, but at the same time, I'm processing through pinning what I'm actually interested in or not. I like to just kind of go back through my boards and say, oh, it's actually how I plan the colors for my collection every season is I'm interested in certain colorways. I just kind of go through pictures passively when I'm wasting time. And then I'm like, okay, this is the stuff I pinned for fall 2024. I bet we're ready to go, right? So all that time that is like time wasting, it's actually not. It's working just in different ways.
And with less pressure, right? Because then you get to visually see like, oh, I actually chose 20 images with orange hues. Huh.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because your subconscious is kind of just like doing the work then at that point. That's fascinating.
Exactly. Yeah.
I love that. Okay, I want to ask you one other pragmatic thing about all of these different spaces that you're in. And this is a completely personal question. This is just selfishly me wanting to know this. Because what I struggle with in balancing multiple things is the sense of urgency I have of how quickly I want to be able to do, how quickly I want to be able to accomplish whatever it is that I'm setting out to do, right? And I'm in this period for me right now where I'm finding, and maybe it's just, see, now I'm just processing out loud with you. Maybe it's just that our brains go through different seasons, right? Maybe we have seasons where we can gain inspiration from being in all these different places and managing these things. And then there's other seasons where you just need focus on one thing. And that's my out for myself personally. I'm going to come back to that. But like now for me, I'm finding it the context switching to go from one thing to the different thing and back again is so exhausting or time consuming, or it feels like it takes away so much to like get into that mental space of, you know, to transition from corporate Nicole to Potter Nicole to musician Nicole. Like those are different mental places,
Mhm,
I assume.
mhm. Yeah, I think it
Correct where
no,
I'm
no,
wrong.
no. I love what you're hitting on, and I think it kind of goes back to it's just Nicole, and these are the things that I do, and this has been a lot of ego breakdown too. Of I am not the things that I'm doing. I do those things. And it also gives me the ability to say, if I ever choose to walk away from any or all of those things, I've taken what I've taken from them. But at the same time, and I've given what I've given to them. But these are the things that I do with my time. And so I'm trying, as part of this practice, as much as I can, to remove the ego from it so I can break down those walls and learn from each of them and let that transition be more fluid. It's how I've been able to say, oh, yep, that's a work thought while I'm in the pottery wheel. Let me just park that over there. And when I'm in that time, I can come back to it, or vice versa. That's a great idea for me to work on Thursday when I'm in the studio. And let me come back and do that and forgive myself for thinking those things in the time when maybe I was doing something else, which has been a really long road. I felt a lot of guilt sometimes for having these different elements of myself and wanting to pursue them all. I actually feel like I have more cat energy, but I think my sense of wonder is very golden retriever like. And that I can really just enjoy so many things and want to pursue them. But where I focus that mastery piece is, I'm sorry, I've killed Rebecca.
I'm dying. I'm just picturing, so as much as I know you have a practice of running, I've never seen a video of it, and now I'm picturing you very bouncy when you run.
I don't know. What is my running form like? You'll never see it. You'll never see it.
Yeah, because I never show up to your running group in Nsika.
This year. Well, nobody did last year, but it's, look, aspirational. Next year, we'll make it happen. The Glaze Run. I'm putting it out there in the universe. We're going to do it. But no, I feel less guilt about following those threads because, again, I have the fundamental belief that all of those different things come back and end up being valuable information in the future. I have a leader at my current job who actually asked me at one point, I think I was doing a lot with Nsika and posting a lot about that. And then one of our senior leaders ended up asking me about, hey, like this pottery thing really seems to be taking off. Like, are you going to leave for this? And I was like, you know what? No, like I want to do both. And I think that's how I really started to imagine a life for myself in which it's possible. Like I have aspirations to have a storefront and have a studio space and all of those things. And I think part of the reason why I can picture those things so clearly is because in my day job, I've scaled teams. I've built teams of people and figured out how to make that work. And I know that the ideas of what we have to accomplish does not have to rest on me. I do it all the time. I manage a team now. It started making me think like, well, of course I could manage two teams. I could manage a team that does pottery stuff and I could manage a team that does communication stuff, right? That'd be super cool. And I also sit on a couple of arts boards here or like grant reviewing boards is the more accurate way to say it here in Dallas. And that has been super eye-opening because, these large organizations are giving money to the arts and arts organizations and seeing both sides of how all of that works. And there are some amazing people, but women who have this incredible experience having served on all of these boards. They're business women. They're in the arts, but they also are just like these powerhouses. And you don't even have to be an artist to do that kind of thing. But they have, again, figured out that scale thing of I can scale my influence and scale my expertise and scale my support across this metroplex, right? And so when we're down here thinking about how do I get this to these retailers, there are people who are up here thinking about how do we give these millions of dollars to these arts organizations to support. So I am always trying to figure out now, and my longer term aspirations are, how do you make sure you're at the right tables? How do you make sure that you are, again, making the right connections? And how do you also make sure that you're giving yourself a large enough vantage point to dream bigger because it's possible to scale that influence. And it's been really interesting being part of that world also because it's just like, or I've been very patient and organic with like trying to grow those relationships. And I talk about being an imposter. I'm like, why do I have the ability to be in this room? I shouldn't be able to say anything in some of these rooms. But it's been really cool to, over time, just build those relationships really organically by putting in the work to learn the organizations and see why, and it gives some like honest opinions about why we should or should not be funding things as an artist and also as a business person, and being able to use my influence in both worlds in a really cool way. So again, I think it just all kind of ends up coming together super nicely. But you have to trust that everything that you're doing does matter in where you're supposed to be, not where somebody else is supposed to be or where somebody else wants you to be, I think. And I'm saying this out loud so that way I trust it myself.
As you were talking, what I was thinking about was that a lot of people I know who have had a particular amount of success in their life made a point of being in spaces outside of whatever industry they were in order to get that perspective or in order to stay apprised to what else was going on in the world or in other markets or commerce or whatever category. I think as much as we are all creative, a lot of times we think really literally, or I think really literally in terms of like, oh, well, I want to start a pottery business. Therefore, I'm going to go to NCECA because that's the biggest conference and education source for potters, when maybe going to a e-commerce conference would teach you a completely different set of skills that are actually the pragmatic things to get the thing off the ground. That was a lot of use of the word thing in one sentence, but you get where I'm going here. In terms of those kind of, it's like the Venn diagram of where we want to go and how these different worlds overlap and what you can take from one to bring to another to make you better at a craft, at a skill, have a more interesting, actually, let me back up. At the end of the day, isn't so much of art bringing disparate ideas together and creating your own Venn diagram and therefore then making something interesting out of that? So
I love that you said Venn diagram so many times because I honestly think in Venn diagram. So it's comforting to me that somebody else who plays in the same world and who I admire thinks that way as well. Because sometimes I feel crazy. It is truly like the best ideas, in my opinion, are the ones where you take this thing, this apple and this orange, and you put it in the middle and you're like, oh, they're fruits, right? Like, so finding that commonality in the middle is what the problem is. It's that it goes back to that problem definition piece of like why I've spent a lot of time in this world of finding true problems. And so to your point, yes, like maybe what you need is that e-commerce workshop because the problem that you uniquely see in the world because of your experience is the way that you think about e-commerce and selling your particular thing. It's what you've done with your photography skills and bringing that to ceramics, right? And saying people need to photograph ceramics well, and they're bad at it, and let me help because I know how, right? And so that's how you get the unique artistic idea, business idea, whatever it is. I would say similarly in my world, one thing that I was really proud of this spring is I partner really closely with a collective called Mosaic Makers Collective here in Dallas, and they sell online. You should definitely check out Mosaic. Myself and several artists there had the idea to create a program for students that are kind of wrestling with this problem that we have of we did not major in art, but we're business owners now. And what do we wish we knew? So we created a program called Rise, where it's small now is for students, but is how do you define small when maybe that program has an impact on 4 students' lives? It was stuff that we wish that we had and access to people who were also women makers of color, who could give you advice and share insight into what that world that you want to be in is like and have real conversations. So we started that mentorship program, and then it culminated in an art show that we hosted for them and was open to the community. And so that to me, again, is like a thing that you can't do had I have gone straight to art school, because I would have just done the thing. And there's nothing wrong with doing the thing, but it's like, hey, there's that tension there of longing, I think, longing to maybe have had a different path. And how can we help people who may be headed in that direction learn something different or explore something different? And so I'm grateful for that, because I think there's an opportunity to really maybe dive into that more with people who have that. I think there's more people who resonate with you than not in a lot of cases. And so, like, how do you find those people and build community around that?
And if we all did the same path, if we all did art school and then grad school and then a residency program and then, I don't know, a solo exhibit or a gallery show or whatever, how less interesting would the work be if we didn't have other experiences to bring into it? I mean, that's what I noticed, at least with my photography work. In the early days, I was constantly feeling like behind from the people I went to school with who knew they wanted to be photographers, who took the business classes, who had started their business straight out of the gate and went on this very clear, clean-cut path, but also were very much only focused on the camera. And I came to it through this desire to connect with humans. And so I wasn't really, like, the camera was just like an accident. Right? It was just a means to an end to get to connecting with somebody, to get to learning their personality and then documenting that personality. And I wouldn't have had that without the other stuff that happened in between, the graphic design degree that never got a job and starting a business. Like, there was a lot in between that, right? So
maybe to ask a question, how many of the people that you think went straight towards photography are still doing it?
That's a great question. I have no idea. I know one for sure, but I also would say a lot of those people, there's not a polite way for me to put this, get cranky about change. I think when you are on a very straight path, my experience has been seeing people on very straight paths. When the world throws change at you, it can stir up a lot of frustration or anger or fear that presents as frustration and anger. And it's really fascinating right now to connect this also with pottery, because when I first started with photography, it was at the kind of precipice of the change from film to digital. I learned on film. I learned in a dark room. My poor parents had to develop a lot of rolls of really bad pictures of our puppy and all of these things when I was a kid and in 4-H. And then I was at this shift with digital that I was new enough that changing wasn't a big deal. But people who had been working at this craft for decades were really mad that now digital made access to the quote unquote materials to connect it with pottery easier, right? Like, my 20-something self could bop in and be like, I have this new camera and now I'm a photographer. And I love my job. And this probably sounds familiar to a lot of makers now, because ceramics is going through the same thing. Like, okay, access to resources is still a problem, of course, but presuming that was equal, it is easier. Ceramics is more popular now. There are more community studios than the era of needing to know someone who knew someone who got you an apprenticeship and then you studied under a craftsman and that's that, right? And we're glad that that has changed, because so many more people have access to the arts than they used to. It's not perfect yet, but we're getting there. But I think the people who had this path that was very clearly laid out, now all of us have come onto the path and created a traffic jam, to mix a lot of metaphors.
Yeah, well, because it was a lot of work, right? Like, you did the things, you did all the right things, and you're expecting a certain outcome. And here come some people who are cutting in on the short path. It's going to create resentment. And I thank you for saying that and for sharing that also, because I've seen a lot of the same things, again, in the corporate world, where, you're in line for the promotion or whatever, and then boop, here some change happens. And now it's not the same place where it used to be. But I think that's where, going back to staying focused on the problem at hand. And it's not even just like the problem. It's like you have to define that problem. The problem is the motivation that you bring to it, I think. not even necessarily what everybody thinks they're working on. It's like, I see this thing this particular way. And that's my truth around it. So again, for me and Clay, I'm fascinated by the making and the feeling and finding that particular thing and helping people see that now has probably been a bit an expansion of kind of my mission statement as well, is like there's the personal element and then there's the how do we scale that to other people. But so long as that stays true, it doesn't really matter what the medium is. It doesn't matter whether we're teaching workshops or doing jewelry or doing installations or whatever. It's going to evolve. It should evolve. But that is my why, at least for now, until it expands some more. But, keeping that top of mind, keeping that focused is what I think helps me stay motivated, helps people stay in the work.
And frankly, the constant is change, right? Like you see people, to bring this into the pragmatic of every day, the conversations we're always having on the podcast here, when it comes to Instagram, right? You see people get so upset. And it's like, guys, this has been happening now for a decade. It's going to keep changing. Something new is going to come along. Something else is like, change is the constant. And I think the secret weapon of people who are running small businesses or self-employed in whatever capacity, the thing I see as the character trait that runs through the people, frankly, doing well for themselves is that willingness to work through the change, is that desire or the interest or the willingness to learn a new thing and to just keep iterating.
Exactly. And that's hard when you're tapped out, right? If you don't have the systems, if you don't have kind of that infrastructure for yourself, which again is an evolving thing, there's nothing perfect, but if you kind of stay static, it becomes difficult to be change nimble.
Ooh, I like change nimble. I like that phrase. I do also. I want to point out one other thing I noticed as you were talking about these different spaces you're moving between and a lot of amazing things you're a part of in terms of being on boards and bringing together these different. There's things that exist that you are a part of now, but you're not doing it by yourself. This is the thing I was hearing, like, okay, you're a communications professional who are as part of a team. You are doing work within the arts, but that's part of a group of people that wanted to bring about this organization, creating Rise. Like, you didn't say, oh, I want to create this, and then go and do it on your own and find people to help that you have to manage. That would be a completely different workload, I think.
Yeah. And thank you for saying that as well, because sometimes you have the aha moments by somebody mirroring that back to you. But it's really true. And again, I think that this is something that I've really learned from the business world is sometimes you build a team, which I've had the pleasure of being able to do over the past couple of years of really building a team from the ground up. Sometimes you're given a team, which has happened in the past, and you have to work through that. How do you get to know each other? How do you do all of that? But the reality is, if you can learn to decouple yourself from the outcome that the team is able to produce and be satisfied with that, there's so much more that you can produce, and also that becomes consistent that the whole group can produce, and it's not all on you. So when we talk about, like, as makers, all the things that we have to do, like, what can you be outsourcing? Not just even in terms of like, give this to this person, but like, you have a support group, I'm sure. There are people in that support group of people who are better at thinking about marketing than you are. So lean on them for ideas. You don't have to be the sole brilliant Steve Jobs. And even that's a bad metaphor, because there are so many people at a company like Apple or whatever who are thinking about all of these things all the times. But I think we have this idea that as an artist, you have to be a genius and a savant, and you have to be able to do all of these things on your own. And it's like, no. The best thing that you could do is realize what you don't do well and surround yourself with people who are better and capable of helping you think about those things yourself, and expand and scale that work and that impact together. So I loved working on the Rise project because I would say my role in that was coordinator. I wasn't a mentor. We had 4 amazing mentors. We had Katie, who was the other co-facilitator and leader of that. And we would just bounce things off of each other constantly. It was very iterative. And we were building the program as we were gathering the students and all of those kinds of things, which hopefully will be more organized in the future. But at the same time, I think it was really a beautiful symphony of ideas and processes, because if you learn how to work through and with people, ultimately as artists, we are creating things for people, right? So if you learn how to work through people and learn how to take input and all of those kinds of things, then what you also produce is just like better in the end, stronger. It's more unique. It's created with more insight. So what does it look like to have teams of people around you, not just be an island of your own thoughts? And I think that's also where some of the vulnerability comes from. If you like sit and park yourself in a dark studio and then you're like, ta-da, I've made these things. You have no idea how people have felt about that work along the way. Whereas when you work on a team,
Yes.
you know, you know what it's going to be like. There's somebody who's willing to tell you what they think the crowd response is going to be, what the marketing response is going to be. And you can learn how to take all that input and care or not care. But if you can learn that flow, you will be such a stronger business person. I think you'll be a better artist because you won't be sensitive about what you produce. You'll know.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. I connect with that on so many different levels. I mean, even just trying to write a course, for example. Like the first time I did it, it was in that dark room. Nobody knew what I was putting together. And then it was kind of like, okay, I hope this is what they thought it was going to be. Because, you know, you put little feelers out there, but then the actual big thing. Whereas the second time around, it was a question and a response. You know, it was like, okay, what do you need? And now I will do that, which is a much more comfortable place. Also, it's less vulnerable, but less about me and more about the larger group of us. I think what I'm hearing you say, which you know anybody who has listened to me knows is a soft spot in my heart, is like, we're talking about community here. We're not talking about you need to build a board of official chief marketing officer and customer service and sales. I mean, you can do that too. That's cool, but you have to manage that group. You know, what I'm hearing is like, get a group of peers and colleagues around you who you can also feel safe sharing with, who then can be like, I love this idea, but the way you just said that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. And honestly, if you think about, let's say, community studio, or taking it to the more formal education space, the critique process, it's all in that vein, right? Of getting quality feedback and saying, what I'm putting into the world, how is it reading? How does it read to you? And maybe you care, maybe you don't, but it's better to know than to just close your eyes and pretend like it doesn't matter. It matters. That's why we get upset when things don't go well. So in the process of creating systems, how do we create systems where we get that feedback in a time frame where we can do something about it, instead of until after it's too late and we put in all the work and we hurt our own feelings and, right? We've got a lot of opportunity to do that in a comfortable way. Not comfortable in the sense that it's always going to feel good, but comfortable in the sense that we can make it part of how we work instead of, you know, a hope and a prayer on how after we finish the work.
I would also add to that definition of comfortable in the sense of like receiving that feedback from people you trust and feel safe with, right? Because there's a lot of ways to get a lot of feedback on the internet, right? Like you can post something on Instagram and ask people directly for feedback. You can go into one of many of the very large Facebook groups and post something and get a lot of opinions. I don't personally think those are particularly constructive.
Yes.
Personally, maybe there's some nuggets in there, but it's a lot of times you wind up with like opposing viewpoints where you're like, well, is what I just shared, is what I'm trying to produce actually coming across? Because one person says yes and one person says no, and I don't know what it means, as opposed to, and I'm clearly biased and thinking very much of my community members here that we're growing, but people who know who you are, people who know where you are at in life, people who know how long you've been making, because obviously the way you're going to critique the work of someone who's been practicing intentionally full-time for 10 years is different than the person who 10 days ago sat down at the wheel. that would be unnecessarily cruel to critique those in the same way. And so having a place where you can have nuance and comfort and safety and critical feedback is a completely different community of people than like, hey, here's what I made today. Do you like it?
Oof. Yeah. Say it out louder for the people in the back who are also recovering people pleasers because yes,
and nobody
we're
can
both
see us, but
raising
we're
our
talking
hands.
about
Yeah.
ourselves.
The thing is, like, not all community is a safe space. And we have to acknowledge that, like, we just have to acknowledge that you could think you have community. And I want to say out loud to the people who right now, because I know that I feel like I'm in church. Like there is somebody listening to this right now who is having a feeling like their community is not working for them. Listen to that feeling. Not everyone is meant to be on the journey that you're on and vice versa. There are just some people that cannot go the same place that you're going. And you've got to learn how to accept and pivot from those spaces quickly because there's nothing that kills a good idea like bad community. And they can really kill your spirit and the direction that you're heading in. So finding the people that you trust. I go to Community Studio every Sunday. So if you follow me on Instagram, and you probably see me post about Studio Sunday, like those are my people. We go to Luby's cafeteria at lunch in the middle of our studio day together, and we talk about everything and we support each other too outside of life. But those are people that I trust with my ceramics life and my life, right? I trust them to give me feedback about whether or not the walls of my pot are too thick. And I trust that they will give me some good counsel about it, spill some random tea, right? And to me, that's that safe space that I'm talking about, not people who you aspire to. In fact, I think maybe some of the worst people that you could try to be in community with are people that you aspire to, because you will contort yourself in very strange ways to try to be in their community instead of, yes, finding the people that you can actually be your authentic self with.
Yes, because I have been there. I have spent a lot of money to try and be in, I'm going to use air quotes, community with the people I was aspiring to. And the phrase I constantly used was feeling like the awkward younger cousin. Number one, because I am the youngest cousin. And so I know that actual feeling of like, you're 4 years younger. So you're not quite the same age growing up. When you're in junior high and somebody's in high school, that's worlds apart. But you're like, but I can come with, right? I can come with. And it's like,
and they say things to you like, oh, wait until you're, and right, it's not a peer-to-peer conversation. It's like, that's cute. If you feel like someone is that's cuting you, that's not your community. That's maybe a different kind of relationship. And I won't say like you always need to leave that kind of relationship, but that is not your peer-to-peer people that are going to help you advance ideas. Those are the people that are going to make you feel like you have FOMO all the time.
Yes. Yeah. And that's kind of a dangerous, like, if you can stay in a healthy mental place of like, I'm going to look at this as aspirational and inspirational, and, you can have kind of a mentor relationship, that can be healthy.
Exactly.
But I think what we're talking about is like a group context of surrounding yourself. Yeah. Oof. I feel that like in my chest right now.
Yeah.
I have no segue because I'm like, yeah, that's just a hard earned lesson, and you only know it once you're in it, I think.
Yeah. And we've all had it. I think everyone has had it and has that hard lesson. But I guess the moral of the story is if you feel like you're in it, you are, and listen to that and free yourself up to do some amazing work by not striving and instead being. Like, find the places where you can be instead of fit in. And actually, I think that's a concept that I'm working out. It's related to running. It's related to ceramics. It's the idea of keeping up. And so that 10,000 pieces that I'm making is related to that. And it's a body of work. Again, kind of come full circle all over it. I started this body of work in 2018, but I didn't have the skills, the tools, the language, but I had the interest to do something with this concept that I'm about to work on more fully. And then I have all this life experience between 2018 and all this ceramics experience and all this athletic experience as well, and all these horrible friendship experiences in my personal life to bring it together and have a feeling that I'm going to be working towards expressing. And I'm just like, man, I'm so glad I didn't give up on that, because it's going to be a really healthy way to work that out. So I'm being very vague about a thing that is like talking about simmering. It's simmering like in the whole back of my brain, and I'm slowly working on it. But I'm excited because I know that it's going to come to life, and it'll come to life first in a series of cups I'm creating this fall for a gallery show. But then there's some bigger things that I want to do with it. But yeah, I'm really allergic to the idea of keeping up, and I don't want to do it anymore. And so wherever you're in those spaces, get out ASAP.
This is really funny because you can't see my notes in front of me. But the one thing I wanted to come back to before I let you go, because I know we both knew we could go, and I want to be respectful of your time. Or we could just pour a cocktail and keep going. I don't know. It's up to you. But is you put different words to it. And I'm curious if what I have written down connects in the way that I think it connects. But in that you are splitting your time between so many things, and that sense of urgency that is so prevalent in the world at large, when you are looking at your peers and your colleagues and Instagram and all of these things, and is it a how-to question? I don't know if it's a how-to question. It's the $1 million question of how to balance that in the sense of the time you give yourself permission to be able to like bring something to life, I guess is the thing I'm trying to, like, you just said you're allergic to keeping up. So I feel like that is the answer, but I just see so many makers out there who they have this feeling that they need to be doing more because maybe they're seeing someone who they perceive as being full-time and they want to be full-time. And so, okay, I have to do all these things, but also I'm working a 9 to 5. I have kids. I have this. I have that. Like, the reality cannot be that same machine pace.
Yeah.
I don't have a question mark ending in this, but I think
I know exactly where you're going. And I think I've got kind of 2 examples around that. And then again, we will wrap it up so this doesn't end up being a 3-hour podcast. But yeah, maybe the short answer is I am starting to come to a place where I don't have that sense of urgency because I've seen it play out now enough. And I think there's a difference between being smart and experienced for that very reason of being smart is being able to intellectualize something. Having experience is having seen the patterns over and over and over and over again. And I think in my business career life, I saw people who are very smart jet out of the gate with me thinking that we have to go to some amazing end. And the reality is here we are probably about 11, 12 years post-graduation. And a lot of people are slowing down, not in a way that makes us unsuccessful, but we're not all going to be vice presidents, period. Like, it's just not going to happen. And we are still going to live amazing lives. And that is a realization you see over time. But in the beginning, to have come to that realization would feel like failure. Of course, I'm going to be CEO of whatever. We're all going to be CEOs. We're not going to be. And very few of us even want to be. So there's that of just like, although I am a CEO of my own business, but that's a side thing. Right? Like of somebody else's business, right?
Humble brag.
I'm climbing that ladder. But I mean, so there's that of just like, if you watch the patterns over time and you watch your own self and your own experience, you realize, well, like you don't have to run so fast, so hard for so long. And that comes back to the actual running too of like, I like half marathon training. Eventually I hope to do a marathon, but it's one of those things where if you do a 5K, running a 5K at a 9-minute pace is like, it's all right. It's not super. It's okay. It's good. It's good for me too.
I'm over here like, what? 9 minutes is baller.
It's probably not going to win you any kind of like medals. But if you were to do that over the course of a marathon, that's pretty good. Like that's a pretty good pace. And also, by the way, if you keep doing that till you're 80, you're probably going to win your age category. So it's all relative of like how long, how far, how long are you able to keep this up? And so when I say I'm allergic to keeping up, I'm allergic to running somebody else's pace for too long. I need to find my own pace where I feel comfortable in each of the things that I'm doing and say, I'm good here. And I don't have to wait for somebody else to give me permission to do that. And I can feel that sense of satisfaction because guess what? I might be looking to somebody else and then they leave the race entirely. And then what was all of this for? So I need to be comfortable with what I'm doing and feel satisfied when I go to bed at the end of the day that I did what I wanted to do, accomplished what I wanted to do. And Clay, in business, in life, in family, all of those different elements of me. They're not the things that I am, they're the things that I do. And so how do I feel satisfied as I'm doing those things to keep them in balance for myself?
Yes. And also when we just try to follow somebody else, they've already done the thing. Like it's never going to work out the same way for me as it worked out. If I'm trying to follow you, it's never going to work out the same way for me as it did for you because you did the thing at a different time, at a different place, with different life experience. Like it just doesn't work.
Exactly.
Unless it's a cycling race. And then there's probably like some smart backdraft, like, I don't know, working with drag. That's what I'm looking for.
Well, I don't cycle yet, but let's come back. I'll come back to you and let's talk about it.
I think I subconsciously purposely chose cycling because I was like, yeah, until you become a triathlon person, like
no, hard pass.
I can see it.
Can't
I can
swim
see
yet.
it.
So we got 2 things to accomplish. It'll be too much.
Fair enough. All right. I used to teach swimming lessons, side note, but that's a different story from another time. And we were you brought a beautiful bow on the end of that, and then I just blew it up.
This is what we do. I love it.
Maybe. Okay. I just wanted to double check we answered the questions that people had submitted ahead of time. And there is one other one that Jenna had asked that I think is just a quick hit and won't take much time, but you could surprise me. And I think I will acknowledge she had asked a question about community that I think we already spoke to in terms of like the hardest and the easiest and the most fun part about that. But her quick hit question was, who would be your dream artist to do a collab with?
Oh, that's a hard one. Immediately my mind thought Beyonce because, like Beyonce always 100%. I wouldn't be the millennial woman that I am if I didn't say Beyonce. And honestly, you never know, girl. If you need an installation, holler. I feel like we could make a Cowboy Carter collaboration in a heartbeat. So chances are I should probably be speaking to Mama Tina, but just in case, you never know.
You just got to find the right person in that. This is now out there. It will be out there on the radio waves to get to her in one way. And I feel like you have the visual track record to do good by her. If people come find you and scroll to find that costume, because that was
well, maybe just
amazing.
To make this answer longer than you asked for it, but just also very, very true to what we've been talking about today. I mean, let's talk about how Cowboy Carter is talking about genre, right? You don't have to fit into a particular box. And as somebody who I feel like the representation there, Beyonce has done a beautiful job of representing Black women and Black women in business and artistry in a way that other people have not. And the fact that the conversation now is about stepping out of the boundaries of genre and also stepping into a genre too and being unafraid of that. Hey, the blueprint is there, right? So definitely Beyonce.
Oof. Yes. Oh man. There's so much weight there that I'm just gonna leave it. We're just gonna leave it there, and we're gonna see what happens in years to come, because I will not be surprised. I hope that I'll still have your contact information when that time comes, where I'll be like, Nicole, remember?
You're gonna do the interview for both of us. Boom. Manifesting.
I just got a little sweaty. Oh my God. All right. We got to get some more reps in before that one. All right. Yes. I'm totally going to go turn on that album now while I make dinner. I don't make dinner. What am I saying?
Live your truth.
I'll turn on the album while there is dinner.
Oh my God.
Speaking of fabulous Beyonce costumes, though, where would you like to send people to see all of the visual accoutrement that you are putting out into the world?
Wonderful transition, my dear. So here's the unfortunate part. I have the hardest possible business name to say in audio, and I will just say this, but hopefully you could drop it in the show notes. It's N as in Nicole, B as in Bernard, and then makes as in makingstuff.com. And then same thing, but with a dot in the middle of NB and makes on Instagram. So unfortunately, it could sound like a lot of other things, but that is me, NB makes.
Got it. Love it. You already know that I loved Nicole's points on the importance of community. And if you've only ever listened to one other episode here on the podcast, then you also already know exactly where I find the most beautiful community online, if you're interested in joining us. So I'm just going to go ahead and pop that link in the show notes in case today might be the day you happen to want to wipe off the mud from your hands and click on over to makersplaybook.com/community. But also, Nicole is a part of another beautiful online community called Cabo Clay. If you haven't yet heard of Cabo, it is, quote, a virtual social network that connects Black ceramic artists and encourages in-person initiatives by and for our members. The collective exists to decrease experiences of racial isolation and to claim our heritage and influence as African-descended people within the field of ceramics. End quote. So if this community sounds like more of the right fit for you to find support, then you can learn more by visiting caboclay.org. Now, naturally, I'm resisting the urge to ramble on and on about how powerful community is, yet again, so I have no good segue to wrap things up here. However, if you have any questions at all about finding your own support network, aside, of course, from well-meaning loved ones, friends, and family, but rather that kind of support that comes from fellow makers, full-timers, side hustlers, newbies, and veterans, the people who deeply, in their gut, understand what you might be going through when you're wading through the waters of less than helpful advice online, when you're feeling stuck in your making and your craft, or just, overwhelmed with everything. Life, making, everything. Seriously, any question at all you have about finding your people, please feel free to send me an email, hello@makers-playbook.com. I just might know someone who can help, and I'd be happy to connect more makers together, whether that's inside the community or not. Once again, this episode was made possible in part thanks to our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online source for research and inspiration, featuring photos of objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great source for students and teachers. To find out more, visit www.rosenfieldcollection.com. This episode is also sponsored by the Archie Bray Clay business, home of Bray Patch, a ceramic patching material that is best used for filling cracks and bonding breaks. Bray Patch can be applied to either green or bisque ware and fired up to cone 10. It fires paper white, but can be tinted using your chosen clay body and be covered by opaque glaze or slip. Order anytime online at archiebrayclay.com. Audio post-production of this podcast is made possible by help from Christy Kotzfan, with promotional material assistance from Queenie Maliki. The Maker's Playbook podcast is recorded on the original homelands of the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee people, where the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. Until next time, my friends, go get back to making your dreams a reality. Because together, we've got this.
This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.